Okay, so it's now 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we will get going. Thank you very much to everyone for joining and welcome to this webinar, which is about the Marine Geospatial Bibliography. My name is Philip Ruck. I am Biodiversity and Water Coordinator for IPECA, and I project manage this particular project on the MGB. And what we wanted to do today, really, with this webinar was just to kind of introduce this tool that we've developed, and really it's an awareness-raising exercise. We want to first, let people know the tool exists, let people know how to use it, and also how you can contribute to its ongoing development. Just in terms of logistics, everyone who isn't speaking or isn't presenting has been placed on mute to avoid any background noise, but you can ask questions throughout the presentation by typing in the chat box, and what we'll do is we will collect them throughout the presentation and go through them at the end, and we'll get through as many as we can in the hour. So I've introduced myself. The other two presenters on the line are Ian Voparel from Shell and Daniel Jones from the Serpent Project. Ian is Business Lead for Venture Support Integration for Deep Water at Shell. He's also Chair of the Deep Water Task Force, which is an IPECA group which has led the development of the Marine Geospatial Bibliography. Daniel is coordinator of the Serpent Project, which is a deep sea research project which collaborates closely with the oil and gas industry, aiming to make cutting-edge industrial ROV technology and data more accessible to the world science community. And Daniel's worked closely with IPECA in developing this product, so he's well placed to tell everyone about it. So just to go through what we're going to talk about today, I will start with a very brief introduction to IPECA and what we do, just in case anyone isn't familiar with that. Then we'll go on to talking about the Marine Geospatial Bibliography, about the background and rationale for developing it, who we're targeting with it, how you can use it, and then the next steps as well, what we're planning to do with it going forward. And then we'll finish with some conclusions and Q&A. So, what is IPECA? I'll run through this very quickly, but IPECA is the Global Oil and Gas Association for Environmental and Social Issues. We are celebrating our 40th year this year. We were formed in 1974 following the launch of UNEP. We are the only global association involving both the upstream and downstream oil and gas industry, and our membership covers over half of the world's oil production. We also work closely with our sister organisation, which is OGP, the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. And a few details about what IPECA does. So we help the oil and gas industry improve its environmental and social performance by developing, sharing and promoting good practices and solutions, by enhancing and communicating knowledge and understanding, by engaging our members and others in the industry, and also working in partnership with key stakeholders. And IPECA is the oil and gas industry's principal channel of communication with the United Nations. So moving on to this slide is just an overview of our members. As we have 36 company members and 16 association members. We take a broad and inclusive approach to membership. So we have the super majors in our members. We also have some smaller oil and gas companies and national oil companies as well. So with that, I think we can move on to the topic of today's webinar, which is the Marine Geospatial Bibliography. and I will hand over to Ian to talk us through how it came about and the rationale for developing it. So, Ian?
Sounds great, Philip. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Boperl. Philip gave me a nice introduction before. Thank you. I happen to be sitting in New Orleans, the United States, right now. So it's an especially early morning for me, but exciting to be here to talk about the MGB, the Marine Geospatial Bibliography. Philip mentioned that the MGB, and I'll use that shorthand throughout the talk, has been developed by IPECA's Deepwater Task Force. And so that's a collection of a number of the members of IPECA who are really interested in deep water oil and gas activity, and of course also the environmental and social stewardship of the oceans that goes along with doing that right. You see here the mission statement that we developed when first thinking about the MGB, and just a little bit of history. We've been working on this for a little over a year, well, maybe 2 years now, and it's really wonderful to see it kind of come to fruition here. But you can see the mission statement. I won't read it for you, but I wanted to point out a couple of really key terms in that mission statement. Share sources of up-to-date scientific knowledge. The MGB, this bibliography, is not a database per se, but it's a bibliography. It's a collection of the reports and publications that are done on the environmental effects of oil and gas activity. And the reason is we want to have that value add, right? It's not just data points, it's someone's interpretation of them, and often that's through peer-reviewed scientific publication, so it's really rigorous. So we wanted to make sure that we were making knowledge easier to find and easier to share amongst a wide variety of different communities, and I'll talk a little bit about them, the different communities that we first envisioned, and hope you have good ideas about that later too. As you can see, it's related to marine environments, biodiversity, and ecosystems, and so that's clear, right? This is within the purview of the Deepwater Task Force, and that was the kind of the boundaries that we all started with when thinking about this. What exactly is deep water? How deep? Well, we had to come up with a couple of definitions just to help get ourselves started. But really what we mean is the stuff that's below the continental shelf break and deeper. As you know, many oil and gas activities are now occurring in what we call ultra deep water, and we wanted to make sure that we captured the kind of information that would help advise that moving forward for the decades to come. And the final point of this slide that I think is really critically important is transparency and awareness. Everything about the Marine Geospatial Bibliography is intended to be completely transparent to users and people who call upon it to find information. This MGB is about making that information and knowledge easier to find. It's about centralizing it in a particular place and making sure that the provenance of that research is well accredited and found. So it was really important that it's clear how this works. It's clear how the good scientific research that goes into the MGB is made available for a wide variety of people. Daniel, I'm sorry, Philip, next slide, please. Thanks. Well, let me point out a couple of things on this too. I mentioned most of these in my previous statement, but if you look at that image there, that's actually a screen capture of part of the MGB. You can see its website there on the bottom. It is up and running and live, and you feel free to go there and take a look at it after today's talk. We certainly hope you do. And you know, the MGB is a tool, and we wanted to make scientific research easy to find, to address a number of different challenges that we have. We also wanted to make sure that it's geospatially referenced. In other words, it shows where in the world that scientific research occurred. Because what we find is that in some of the more mature basins of the world, for example, like the North Sea or the Gulf of Mexico, there are thousands and thousands of scientific publications that have occurred there. In other parts of the world that are new for the oil and gas industry, there's obviously less of a body of information available there. And so we wanted to demonstrate that and make things easy to find when they might be applicable to a lot of different regions. And you can see that third bullet there, right, which is all about the transparency, which I've talked about before. Next slide, please. Well, why did we develop the MGB? You can see a couple of the initial bullet points we have here. We were recognizing that in many parts of the deep ocean, the research that we do on it is often led by oil and gas activities. The oil and gas industry comes into an area that tries to use best available information, best available science to guide our decision making, and oftentimes collects a lot of that information. We wanted to make sure that that was well recognized, and captured in the bibliography. Not might be interested in that. We recognize that people like to say the deep oceans have been less well studied as the face of the moon. I'm not so sure that's true anymore, but still, research on the deep ocean and marine ecosystems continues to progress rapidly, and we wanted to try to make sure that we keep pace with that. You can see the second bullet there. That's obviously, we want to best understand and use best available science to guide decision making around the environmental costs and benefits of offshore oil and gas activity. And that third bullet point there was particularly poignant for a number of us. There are a lot of different communities of users and a lot of different formats in which scientific information and publications are captured. We wanted to make sure it was brought together in a useful way that people could find it. My personal story is I came into the oil and gas business from a background as an academic oceanographer. And I found that I didn't know too much about it when I first joined the oil and gas business. So I had a very steep learning curve. And indeed, it's relatively true that the community of oil and gas scientists and other types of oceanographers and environmental scientists don't always have very clear lines of communication. So we wanted to help improve that. Of course, the other very important community is the regulatory and policy-making community, which makes decisions based upon the best available science. Next slide, please. And so I had alluded to this a number of times. When we were developing the MGB, we really wanted to make sure that we reached a number of key audiences, and it's great to have many of you here on the phone now representing a number of these different communities. Clearly, professionals in the oil and gas industry, like myself and other members of the Deepwater Task Force at IPECA, we need to have this information readily available. Many of you have probably heard of the what we call the retirement boom that's going on in the oil and gas industry. And so there's a new generation of professionals that we want to make sure there's plenty of information readily available for as they come up to speed to understand the history of scientific research, the current status, and of course also have a view towards the future. Other audiences, of course, are those that do environmental work for and on behalf of the oil and gas industry. We often work with third-party consultancies that have expertise in oceanographic research, for example. There's that third bullet there. Of course, that was really important to many of us. We also reached the academics and scientists that not only do this work, but may do related or similar work, but may not be that familiar with the oil and gas business. The fourth bullet there, that's a very important one. Ensuring best available science is available for decision-making by oil and gas regulators and policymakers around the world. And of course, the last one is the interested public. I may be unusual in this case, but I find this stuff fascinating and very interesting, and I sure think much of the public would too. The research, scientific research that we've done around the world is a really amazing body of knowledge, and we want to make sure that we share that widely. Next slide, please. And I think this is where I hand it off to Daniel, right?
That's right.
All right, Daniel, take it away.
Okay, so my name's Daniel Jones, and I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to some of the practicalities of the MGB, to give you an overview of the capacity of the system and to give you a bit more information about it. So as Ian said, the MGB was conceived by the IPCA Deepwater Task Force in 2009, and it was the infrastructure was completed in 2012. And in 2012, IPCA tasked both ERM and Serpent with the initial population of data into the MGB. And we wanted to capture as much of the available scientific, industry and regulatory literature that was available at the moment to try and get a good overview, a good starting point for this database and make it a very useful tool. So the first things we wanted to collate was seminal papers and books. We wanted to capture all the individual journal articles that are used on a day-to-day basis within the oil and gas industry. We wanted to capture particularly the journal articles and the reports that are used in environmental impact assessment reports and used for all sorts of other methods. We wanted to capture particularly academic literature, but also the relevant grey literature. So this is the sort of information that's contained in industry reports that's often extremely useful, but not necessarily obvious to find, and people don't necessarily know about it outside of the company in which it was collected. We wanted to focus on the effects, both positive and negative, of oil and gas activities across the board, and we wanted to focus particularly on marine biodiversity and ecosystems. So we were looking at effects, but we were also keen to capture baseline data for deep water systems around the world, because we realised that baseline data is extremely important in understanding and managing the environment. We had, for the population of the MGB, but for no longer, there was an initial geographic focus. This was just to try and make sure we captured as many references as possible and does not reflect the future of the MGB. We want the MGB to be a global resource containing data from all over the world. But when we first started, we focused particularly on offshore areas, so deeper than 30 metres, with a particular focus on the deeper waters, so as Ian says, off the continental shelf. We had a particular focus on the North Sea, particularly the Northeast Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. So we wanted to try and search the available literature to try and populate the MGB. So we identified keywords to describe oil and gas development impacts. We focused on both impact-related keywords such as drilling, PAHs, heavy metals, those kind of things. We focused on receptor keywords such as environment, seabirds, turtles, those kind of things. And we also looked for region-related keywords when we were doing our searches. And these sort of include things like North Sea, Gulf of Mexico, Norway. And I've included a selection of the most used keywords in the references that we've captured in this word cloud, so it gives you an idea of the sort of things that we're picking out and are contained within the MGB. So in our initial searches, we had to collate a huge amount of information. So the first place we started was existing expert bibliography. So these were the reference lists that professionals in the oil and gas industry and academics collated. Many maintain small databases of their best references, and we tried to harvest those through as many contacts as possible through the Deepwater Task Force. And we were able to collect a few hundred really key references in this way through scientist consultancies and oil companies. We were then used existing databases to try and pull out all the references related to environmental impacts of oil and gas, and we were using our keywords in the slide previously to try and do this. So we used the ISI Web of Knowledge, which is a global repository of scientific literature, so that contained much of the recent scientific papers and academic journals and even conference proceedings. And through following some of the reference lists of those, we were able to get some of the older references too. We also did standard web searches, both through Google Scholar, which focuses on academic literature, but also is pretty good at pulling out other reports in that same sort of style, and we also looked at as a free Google search. We were careful to collate reports from industry bodies because we realised that these are going to be extremely important documents and important to contain within the MGB. And we got reports from a whole range of bodies. You can read all the names on the slide. We went through current environmental statements, and this was a really important source of references. We made sure we captured as many of the references that are used on a day-to-day basis within the oil and gas industry. We were also lucky to be able to harvest 2 existing databases which contained large numbers of references relevant to disturbance of the marine environment or oil and gas impact related changes to the marine environment. And we were able to collect the database from the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium, which focused on the Gulf states, and we were also able to harvest the database of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which were both large data sets to fill the MGB with. So for each reference, as an example, I've put a paper on the right of the slide. We were able to obtain the title, simple. We can obtain the digital object identifier, and this is a code which is a stable link to the full text. So we wanted the MGB to allow users not only to find out what was available, but also to access the data. And it is possible to upload full text of papers onto the MGB. We have only done this in cases where there's clear open access to the journals at the moment, and when companies have explicitly stated that it's possible to release the full text of a report. But it's also possible to release partial information on a report, or also just to provide a summary of the research. In this case, we've used the abstract for a scientific paper. And then we've collated the reference, which is included in the MGB. In addition to the simple information about the references, we've reviewed each and every paper that's gone into the MGB, and we've coded it with additional information. And we hope that this is the sort of thing that will make the resource much more useful. We've tried to collate information on the importance of the reference. We've identified key references, and these were references that we felt as experts or that popped up regularly in environmental statements that were clearly being used as seminal papers about environmental impacts of oil and gas industry. We collected information on the location, and we did this at 2 levels. We either looked at the region, so we say the Gulf of Mexico, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, or we provided exact positional information, and we did this for all the key references. So we went through the paper or the report, and we put in the latitude, longitude of the information. We coded the papers according to the phase of operations, whether it was seismic, full field construction, decommissioning. We coded it according to habitat or species, so which habitat or species were affected, and this is very useful for searches, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute. And we also collected information on which impact is occurring to the environment, like cuttings or sound. And as part of our population of the MGB, we carried out regular review and gap analysis. So this matrix, which is a bit complex, but gives you an idea of how we were comparing the number of references to try and make sure we captured as many references as possible. So the numbers just show how many references relate to each of the factors. So we looked at receptor keywords, and we also looked at impact keywords, and we compared the 2. So at the moment, the MGB contains over 10,000 references, so this is a pretty good portion of the available information on environmental impacts of the oil and gas industry, particularly in deeper water. And if you look at the breakdown of some of these, it's mostly academic journals, just over half academic journals. We've captured a good body of reports, and also some of the key books that are available on these impacts. And if you look at it by year, you can see that the references start to build up in the early 70s, and we've got a big peak of information about oil and gas drilling in the early 2000s, and we've got references up to the present day. And this is a slide shows the geographic coverage of the MGB, so it does reflect our initial focus on the Northeast Atlantic. You can see there's over 1,000 references there. In the Gulf of Mexico, over 3,000 references there, but we also captured a huge range of references from all over the world. You can see Canada's got a huge amount, quite a lot of Brazil, West Africa, Middle East, and around Southeast Asia as well. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how to actually find a resource. And we were going to go through the slides, but I'm going to try and share my desktop to see if I can show you an actual example. So hopefully you can see my desktop at the moment, and hopefully you can see a map of the world showing the home page of the MGB with me logged in.
Daniel, it's working. It's working for me.
That's great. Good to hear. I was slightly worried about this. And then, so you can see as in the previous slide, there's circles showing the number of references that are available for each site. So if I do a search, all you do is type into this search box on the left. So if I search birds, for example, you see a global distribution of all the references related to birds. So if I was to zoom into the references related to birds in the United States, you see there's 79. And then you get a cluster showing all the different references related to birds. So I click on one as an example, and it gives a reference about the Exxon Valdez oil spill on marine birds, and I can click on that and get the full information about it. So it gives you description, title, author. And also importantly, it gives you a link through the document object identifier, digital object identifier, and that goes straight to the journal website, and you can actually download the full text of that reference. So hopefully you can see that it's pretty simple to use the MGB and to find the sort of references you want to. So I'm going to try and go back to the talk now. So that covers quite a few of the slides showing how to do it. So you can see you can use the other option is to use the map and zoom in through the map to find the resources you want to, and that will be a free search. And this just gives you the same examples as I've shown in the demonstration. So each resource is categorized by its geographic location, type of operation, environmental aspects and keywords, and having this in mind really helps you target some of the searches. So for the example, the Gulf of Mexico is divided into 3 regions, Central, East and West, and if you can click on the MGB, you can zoom into those regions and you can see the references that have been classified for each of those. And if you want to search for a specific type of operation, you can browse through the MGB and collate the references that are classified for each of those key types. So this hopefully allows the user to search and filter resources very easily, and enables you to quickly find the resources you'd like to obtain. In addition, the MGB is well accessed by Google, so a simple Google search will hopefully pick out MGB references as well as other results. One of the key things about the MGB is that it's not a static resource. We've done this initial population exercise to try and bring the MGB up to speed and to get a load of useful information in there. But the key thing for its continued usefulness is that people continue to populate it with information. So we hope that this can be done through the community, but also with help from IPECA. So we need people to put their latest reports. We're going to encourage academics to submit their latest papers, and this is something that we've received a lot of input from academics around the world who are very keen to share their latest research with people that are actually going to be using it. And I'm going to also, one of the key things about submitting data to the MGB is that we get visibility. So the MGB, as Ian says, is a public tool. So the references that are put on the MGB are online and visible to everyone. And this can be really useful, for example, to highlight the results of environmental initiatives. The MGB is very transparent. By incorporating environmental reports into the MGB, you can very clearly see what's there, and this can be seen by the public. There are controls on the MGB about copyright, and there are also controls about the information that's released to the public. As standard, it will always show the key data about the reference, so the metadata, and this will include title and a summary, but you don't have to have any more information than that. So we can address privacy concerns, but the key point is that the MGB is a transparent resource. And it's also a key resource for archival. So reports and papers can be easily lost as people move around jobs, and archival of the details of the reports, or the reports themselves on the MGB, to be easily retrieved and also used outside of the companies by which they were authored by. So I'm going to quickly go through how to add references, because we think that it's quite simple to add references, and we would really like everyone to get involved and add their favourite references. If there's things missing, you can add those, or if you're involved in any new environmental initiatives, you can also add those. So it's quite straightforward. So you need to log into the MGB. So for that, you need to create an account, which is simple. There's a link from the home page. And once you've created an account, you can just click Submit, as you can see on this slide, and you get a blank page where you can just type in the title, description, author, date published, and DOI, and you can also fill in all the keywords. There's helpful guides that guide you through it, and there's a pretty comprehensive frequently asked questions page that will help you with this process. This is an example of one filled in. You can add locational information, latitude, longitude, and also region. So this one's coded up for the United Kingdom, and you can see that the region's added as well. You can add the keywords related to the study. So you can see here this is coded up by location, West of Shetland, United Kingdom, by category. So it's ecology, biology, drilling, and also by the keywords. And you can see an example there of the sort of keywords that you can include for each study. Once you've done this, you just click Create, and it will go into a submission pool. And at this point, it sits in the MGB approval pool, waiting for one of the reviewers of the MGB to check it over and approve it. And it will then become a public document. It's also possible to import larger files into the MGB. I'm not going to go over this in detail. There's a very good guide in the FAQ, but it is possible to import, for example, RAS files from EndNote or other imports of multiple references if you don't want to type in each one. So I'm going to pass back to Phil to go through some of the next steps for the MGB.
Great, thanks Daniel, and I hope that provided everyone with a useful taster of the MGB tool and how to use it. So on this slide, next steps, as Daniel mentioned, the MGB is evergreen. It's not a final product. We're keen that it continues to expand. We think that the more relevant and high quality resources it houses, the more useful it will be to the various different audiences that we're targeting. So we encourage people not only to make use of the MGB, but also to help us continue to expand it by submitting relevant resources, as Daniel explained how to do just then. So this year we're seeking to improve the tool, not only by adding more references to it, but we're also we're partnering with a GIS consultancy called Island GIS. They're also a Google Enterprise partner, and we're working with them to improve the mapping functionality of the tool, to improve the accuracy of each reference's geospatial location on the maps. I think you maybe saw on the demo that there's in certain places there's a lot of references grouped into one point. The idea with working with Island GIS is that we will have each reference mapped a lot more accurately, and therefore there'll be a lot easier to find references, and they'll be much more easy to pinpoint in the exact location. And we're also looking for other partner organisations who may wish to collaborate with IPICA to ensure the long-term sustainability of the tool. So we recognise this is an ongoing evolution. We're keen to involve external organisations so that it's not just coming from the oil and gas industry, so that other organisations can also promote it and share the benefits. So please contact me if you're interested in that. And then if we go to the final slide, that just about wraps up the presentation part of today. So as I said, please take a look at the tool, and please help us spread the word about it. This is our first real big communications activity around it, so we're keen to get people involved and make sure the tool is people know about it. And yeah, please contact me if you have any queries. I will move straight on into the Q&A session. We've got 20 minutes. Please continue to type your questions in if you have any more. We've had a few come in during the presentation, so I will go through them now. First, the question from Marta Januszewska is, what are the criteria for the document to be included in the MGB? So, Daniel, Ian?
Yeah, well, I think the whole point is we want to be inclusive as possible. So we want things related to environmental impact and the oil and gas industry, but that's pretty vague. We can include studies on baseline studies, we can include studies on lab-based studies or field studies. There's a whole range of things that can go in. And I think that the best thing to think of is to be as inclusive as possible. If you think this study is vaguely relevant, we'll include it in the MGB, and if it's not, we can it'll go through the approval panel in any case. And worst case, having a bigger database, it doesn't really cause any problems as long as things are referenced properly, so the searches are easy to carry out. Then we'd like as many things in there as possible.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So another question from Bernard van Hoel is, can you develop a little more about environmental costs and benefits of oil and gas activities in marine environments? What's meant by environmental costs and benefits?
In which, I guess the question probably refers to the criteria for selection of references, I guess. Is that how you read it as well, Phil?
Yeah, I think it was in relation to one of the earlier slides that was talking about the purpose of the tool and the references it contains.
Well, yeah. Sorry, okay. Daniel, this is Ian. And that was some language used in one of my slides. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bernard. But we wanted to recognize that the environmental studies of the offshore oil and gas activities can take a number of different perspectives, and so we were trying to use costs and benefits simply to be inclusive of those, because for example, there's sometimes concern about environmental impacts of oil and gas activities. There's also a flip side where some offshore oil and gas activities can promote certain parts of the environment, and I'll just offer an example. For the hard structure that we have in the Gulf of Mexico often serves as reef building habitat in the Gulf of Mexico, which is otherwise doesn't have very much hard substrate in it. And so you'll find communities developing around the platform that are very robust. So we just really were using that language to capture both sides of those coins.
Great, thanks, Ian. Okay, another question from Joyce Sivalingam is, are marine mammal sightings databases included as reference material?
I think the answer to that is they would be, and the key thing for the MGB is to capture information about the references that are out there. So if we can include data sets as a type of data in the MGB. So yes, we'd encourage any reference to data sets, but we do have a particular focus on reports on the data. So we'd be more likely that you'd record the report or the fact that there's a specific project going on that's investigating marine mammal sightings. But it is possible to also include reference to the data set, and if you want to highlight that you have a key data set out there that people can use, then by all means include that on the MGB as well.
And let me just add to that too, Daniel, that there are a number of reports on marine mammals, particularly marine mammals, and sound is one of the environmental topics that's of a lot of interest right now. Currently, there's a lot of research being done. So there are a number of publications and reports about that issue already in the MGB. And I just wanted to also mention that the IAGC OGP Sound and Marine Life Joint Industry Program, I hope I got all of those acronyms correct this early in the morning, but also the intent is that the research that comes out of that joint industry program, when it's published, it would also, of course, be put into the Marine Geospatial Bibliography.
Great, thanks Ian and Daniel. Another question from Marta Januszewska. I guess this is related to the previous question about what the criteria for a document to be included in the MGB is. Follow-up question, how would you prove the validity of the study?
This is a difficult one, and it's actually a difficult one not just for the MGB, for the whole of the sort of population of information out there about anything really. But I think from the MGB's point of view, we have classified the references according to their provenance. So if it's a peer-reviewed journal article, then you know that it's gone through rigorous peer review. The quality of the data is likely to be high. If it's a conference proceedings, you know, it might be a bit lower. And if it's a report, you have to exercise perhaps a little bit more caution. So I think it's up to the user to try and put their value judgments onto the reference. We've tried to be as helpful as possible, for example, by classifying it by reference type. We've also classified the references by key reference, and it is possible to characterize them as a lower relevance reference as well. So if there is references in there that people disagree with or are felt not to be very high quality, there are some tools by which they can be identified. And likewise, if there's a really good reference that everyone finds very important, we can also pull those out easily in a search just by adding key to the search.
Okay, great. Well, that's actually all the questions we've received. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up and give everyone 10 minutes back of their day. So if you have any further questions that come to you a bit later, you're very welcome to email me. My email address is on the slide there. And yeah, please take a look at the tool. Share us. Okay, we've got another question. So we'll have this question and then we'll close, I think. So Sebastian von Luders asks, there are a lot of non-peer-reviewed internal reports with fauna sightings from seismic operations. Are these represented?
They are where we know about them. Every report that we've identified has gone into the MGB. But there are a lot of reports that we will not have identified, and these are reports mostly that are held within company archives that we've not been able to access. We have gone through the Deepwater Task Force, which represents quite a few of the companies, and asked everyone in the task force to try and pull out as many of the references that they have identified as possible, and we've included those in the MGB, but there will be gaps, and that's what we're really looking for help in filling from the community.
Yeah, great answer, Daniel. Nothing to add on that.
Brilliant. Okay. Great. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks everyone for your time today. The slides from today's webinar will be available on the IPECA website to download in the next few days. So if you need to use them to help us spread the word, then please feel free to do that. And as I said, any questions, drop me an email. I'll be happy to answer them. So thanks Daniel and Ian, and thanks everyone else for joining today. I hope it was an interesting overview.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Cheers, everyone. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Goodbye.